Good afternoon or evening or good morning, wherever you're seeing this video. My name is Anthony Kaufman. I'm a senior programmer at the Chicago International Film Festival. We're very excited to have with us Nathan Grossman, the director of I Am Greta. For those of you who are tuning in, you probably just saw the film and are interested to hear more from Nathan about it. So Nathan, let's start with what's amazing to me is it seems like you were there from like day one. I don't know if that was just a magic of editing, or were you in fact predicting the great rise of Greta Thunberg?
Maybe the combination in a sense. I was actually there the first day. However, the shots when she's walking, I think is from some other day of those first 2 weeks. But I got a tip from a friend actually that knew her family a little bit that she was going to do some kind of a small strike. And this was in August 2018 in Sweden when the election was coming up. And it was going to be something like local for the election. She thought that the government wasn't doing enough to kind of battle climate change. So me and my boss, we had a discussion, and I decided to go down and give it like 1 or 2 days as a recce to see if she was of any interest, and came down to Riksgatan and asked her if I could start doing some kind of a short thing, and said, you know, don't get your hopes up if I decide to cancel this after a day or two, that it doesn't kind of fly for us from a filmmaker's point of view. And from there it kind of started.
So how did you first know about her? You said you mentioned a friend mentioned that she was going there.
Yeah, she was totally unknown in Sweden by then. I think she had written some kind of an opinion piece, they had some competition at the newspaper. I remember that was the only thing you could find when you Googled her. But we had a very warm summer in Sweden there in 2018, and I have interest in climate change. I think it's an interesting topic, so I felt like it might be worth seeing who she is. And also, I think it's something struck me when Peter, my friend, told me a little bit about it, that it's of course interesting when someone who's young kind of decides to kind of voice their concerns in this issue.
So tell me about sort of your evolving relationship with her and her family, because you know, they obviously trusted you to get into her story, and I imagine as her fame grew, maybe the stakes grew in terms of your presence, in terms of all media access to her, right? So you were in a fortunate position, I guess, that you started early, but I am curious about that relationship, because it is, you do have some remarkably intimate moments, which I don't think we've seen. At least I hadn't seen and was not aware of, like that more the person who Greta is. Yeah.
No, and that was kind of the idea with the film also, to see if there was a way to kind of give a more 360-degree portrayal of Greta, who has been, you know, she's been so much in the media and done so many short interviews, and sometimes can become a little bit stoic, I think, in those situations. And I was interested in understanding kind of more how her inner kind of monologue looked like, and also how she saw the world. But going back to your question of how the kind of film evolved, from the beginning, it was very hard to kind of know exactly where it was heading, but I was open to Greta, and also because she's a minor, I of course spoke to her parents about I didn't really know what I was going to do with this movie, but also that I needed to do kind of my take on it, and that I was interested in their daughter and this activism, and was clear to them that you know, I need to do my film as a director. And if there's anything, you can come in, Greta, in the end, and you can look at the film and see if there's some detail that you think is totally off, and something where I've totally kind of misinterpreted you, and we can have a discussion about that. So that was why I kind of let her do that, which she of course did in the end. And that was of course a nervous moment, especially when you do a film where you try to kind of interpret someone's kind of maybe mind, which is actually impossible. In a sense, filmmaking is always an interpretation of something. And of course, I was worried that maybe I haven't kind of understood her in the way she sees herself. But when she saw the film, then she said that she actually recognized herself and was very kind of happy that it was this nerdy kind of and shy person that was portrayed, and not just the angry stoic person. So that was very interesting.
One conspicuous, I think, maybe absence in a way is the mother, is her mother, right? We see her father, and that relationship was I think very nice to see. But I think, you know, as a viewer, I was like, why is mom not here much at all? Yeah.
Yeah, no, but it's always hard with a film when you have a certain kind of amount of time, and the movie is very much of a road movie. And actually, I've filmed much, like most of the material, on the road, because that was where I thought it was most interested in following, and also that I don't want it to kind of interfere with her school work too much and be there, you know, all the time, and the same a little bit at home. And I felt that the road movie was really kind of the thing that was much like most in connection with her activism. And as the father is what we call a hemmapappa in Swedish, which is kind of the equivalent of at-home dad, I think I would translate it to in English, which is like a gender bend of how it generally has to look like. She's a singer, so she needs to be based in Sweden. Then he kind of is the one who travels with her and became kind of the person who kind of who she's kind of bouncing her thoughts to. But I also wanted to include in small elements the mother, and also I think, as anyone now with Corona knows how it is, kind of trying to have contact with people while, you know, being like over phones and over Skypes and stuff like that.
So the film is obviously, I mean, what I like about the film is that, you know, it's not just an issue film about climate change, right? It is a character study. And a very intimate character study, I think. But of course, it is important that this is a film about the climate crisis. I'm wondering how you saw the balance between the two, like between advocacy and you know, getting this important message across, but also a road movie, a character movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was what was hardest in the edit, you know, to kind of balance the personal and the public, climate change and, you know, human interest. I think that was actually what took so long to kind of make into a film. But I think for me it was important. For one thing which I think is special with this movie, is that it's a Swedish film, but it goes out to an international audience. And some people have, you know, so much knowledge about Greta and they've read everything, but also we shouldn't forget that she's not that famous to a very, very large portion of the world. So it also kind of needs to kind of tell her story and have these public appearances. And then I felt that she's so articulate and has a very kind of nice way of explaining this kind of very big issue of climate change, and that comes through in her kind of inner monologue, and it comes through in her speeches. And then I felt like, okay, but let's kind of keep it that way, and let's let that be the narrative thread, kind of reminding us of climate change. Because I myself got very into climate change by watching An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, which is kind of very centered on facts and figures, which I think is an important film. But I also think that we sometimes need to try to make films about climate change that doesn't just kind of salt and pepper kind of statistics from right to left. It works very well for a specific audience, but I think also the story about climate change is something which is wider, and in this sense, it's more of a personal story about Greta and how climate change kind of has affected her, and how it is being a young person, seeing your future, you know, calculating that, wait, 2050, 2060, those are just not just numbers for me, you know, those are years when I'm going to live, and how is it to kind of feel that way, and how is it then to act onto that science and knowledge. So it becomes more of a personal look on that issue.
So I also had a question about the transatlantic journey on the boat. How many, was it just you in terms of crew joining them on that boat? And I think the boat scenes make up about what, 5 minutes of the film, maybe 7 minutes of the film. So I imagine there could have been probably a whole documentary made about that journey.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Anthony, and one I actually must say that in the edit, actually we tried, or it was more of my try. I'm gonna say that to the editors, as it didn't work out, as many of my ideas don't. But where I had this idea, like, oh, but maybe this is like the entire kind of story. This is like the frame of the story, and we kind of go in and out of the Atlantic as this more kind of poetic place. But it became a little bit fussy. But of course, that sailing trip was interesting. It was kind of some kind of a symbolic moment. And for me, when you do make a documentary, especially about an activist who's active and continues her work, it's hard to know when to stop, because I was never interested in doing the documentary about Greta Thunberg. I don't think it's possible to do that at this moment. This is a year in a life kind of more film, so I wanted to find some kind of an ending. And then I felt that the sailing trip was a very natural point, as she kind of left Europe and something else was coming in the US, and the UN became this kind of final moment. But yeah, the sailing trip, what can I say more about that except those 7 minutes in the film? I think,
was there any moments left, off the cutting room floor about just the craziness of that boat ride?
Yeah,
so you were on the boat, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was on the boat and I filmed everything myself. Exactly. Actually, the entire movie is practically filmed by myself with the shoulder camera, and I took like 90% of the audio myself, both because I wanted to be able to follow her activism, because it was such a high tempo, and I didn't want to kind of interfere with her activism in the sense of having a team stopping up, and also that I personally like kind of that style of kind of myself looking through the camera. But on the boat, of course, that was a necessity, because it was me, Greta, her father, and 2 crew members that just did the sailing. And of course, what ended up on the cutting room floor was kind of the weirdest Groundhog Day thing ever, in the sense that like sailing over the Atlantic, it takes a little bit more than 2 weeks. And it just, it's fairly much the same day repeating itself over and over again. There's no space, there's not much happening. So of course, what you see in the film is maybe a bit of a dramatized, the most dramatic kind of part of those 2.5 weeks. But to add to that, Anthony, I must say that I still really feel sad for one scene that we had to take out from the sailing boat because of space, which is this like weird moment on the middle of Atlantic when Greta is playing this game where you put like a sign in your forehead, and it says a name, which is like a classic game. I think we've all played it in a summer cottage or in school when we want to just kill some time. But now it's kind of playing in the middle of the Atlantic, just like racing 25 knots, which was really funny. I remember she had Winston Churchill on her note.
So the film was obviously made, in a time very different than the one we're in now. I think if it weren't for the pandemic, the climate crisis might have been, one of the top stories of the year. I mean, at least from the U.S. perspective, we had these horrible fires and, storms. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, what it's like to see the film coming out into the world now for, I think in a very changed world because of the pandemic, or maybe not. I mean, in the US, of course, we are still in the thick of it. The rest of many parts of the world are moving on and like remembering, hey, the climate crisis is actually one of our #1 concerns, and even involved, as some scientists say, in the pandemic. So I'm wondering if you see any relationship or any difference in how the film was sort of conceived to be received and how it may be received now.
No, but it's a really interesting question, and it's something that we've discussed a lot, of course, when the pandemic came. Do we want to include this in the film? How and why? And I felt kind of early on that it's important. Like, I think the pandemic it's such an horrendous disease, and I think we really need to treat it in the quickest way we can. But we must remember that there will be a day when this pandemic is over, and that's not super long term in a sense when we're talking long term climate change. And I wanted the film to be able to live beyond that. It's going to go to schools in many countries, and people are going to watch this in the future. And I didn't want to date it towards the pandemic in that sense. But I think one thing which was interesting was also, I think it's a bit, I will show the audience, I'm actually in the editing room here where we edited this film. So it's a special room for these thoughts, in the sense that Greta spoke a lot about, treat a crisis as a crisis. And exactly in this room, I've had so many discussions with the editors about because we didn't feel anything for that term. And I was like, I don't understand it. Like, maybe cut that out. I don't get it. What does that mean? Because I'm 29, I've never seen a crisis. I don't know how a political system acts to a crisis. It doesn't mean anything to me. And then the pandemic kind of struck, and you saw this international community, maybe the US is a little bit separate from that was really, acting as this were a crisis. And you saw especially in Sweden, from right wing to left, everyone just backed the government in a sense, and from the beginning, and said, this is a huge crisis. We need to tackle this. There were, billions in loans you could get, and people changed their behaviors and had, started to stay in, and lots of things, behavior change. And then I thought, like, okay, wait, so this is a crisis reaction. So there is some kind of a geist still in the system. And then it created this kind of point of contact towards what I think Greta has been saying many, many times, like how we should address the climate crisis. She and these young people, they don't have the solutions, but they talk about this mental, will of really kind of attacking something and really doing everything you can to find solutions. And I think now after Corona, young people will have that as a reference. And many of the politicians and people that she has met during kind of the years before the pandemic are the same people who said, oh, this is very hard and we need to take this in meetings. And then they act like this on this crisis. And I think that's something on a kind of bigger scale that we need to remember. And I think something that many of these youth activists, I just speculate, will kind of bring with them into the future of activism, I think.
Yeah, that's great. The whole point. So what is you're in touch with Greta now? I'm wondering, I mean, you said speculate. I'm wondering if are these the kinds of things that Greta is thinking about now? What is she doing now?
I don't know. Of course, this movie was filmed from August 2018 until September 2019. So I followed her until the UN. And of course, we have some contact, but it's not on kind of a daily basis. And so I don't know exactly kind of what she and the climate movement are up to in detail. But I, of course, know that she started high school now. She took one sabbatical year, so she's back in high school here in Stockholm, and I think tries to kind of to have her activism on the side of that, and also as the entire world is kind of trying to see where the pandemic is going and following. And then, as she has said many times, and I think the movement with her says that, they say listen to the scientists, and I think they've been very keen on listening to the health science as well, shutting down the strikes very quickly, at least here in Sweden, not to be spreading the disease. And we still have restrictions here, which are very kind of tight, and you shouldn't be more than 50 people in manifestations, and they've been following that.
So what did she say about the film when you showed it to her? You mentioned that you mentioned that she felt that you did capture her correctly. Was there anything else?
Yeah, but she of course said it was very special and weird to see yourself, on a big screen, which I totally understand, even if she, of course, have seen herself a lot in the media. But what was interesting, and what I think is interesting generally with documentary filmmaking also, is that it's so little that you can fit into a film. And I think with a movie like this, when you, as I said, need to do a story which kind of follow her and kind of give some glimpses in, and also conveys this year, you have to take away so much. So I think she was like, why isn't that in, and why isn't this in? So she didn't want to remove anything. It was more that she wanted to put more in. And I think also that's so striking when it comes to a movie like this, that and why I decided just to make it from my heart, and kind of in the way that kind of the things that I was interested in, because it's if you cram a movie like this in with everything everyone wants to know, and with all the facts, and with the interviews with scientists, and with mothers and fathers and teachers, in the end of the day, you don't have a film in that sense. And I was clear to her that, of course, you will be missing some scenes, but I miss some scenes, and you probably would have loved another scene. So that's the thing of making films.
Okay, thank you very much, Nathan. I think that's a great way to end it on. The film is playing at the festival all week, and of course will be out for the world to see pretty soon after. So
definitely, it comes to streaming platforms. I think in the US, Hulu, I think it is, in November, and before that, you can see it at festivals.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Nathan.
Thank you, Anthony. Bye.
Bye-bye.